Let's go down to Melbourne and catch up with demographer Bernard Salt. Bernard, always good to talk to you. The reason I wanted to talk to you today is only a year ago, maybe, you can give us the details. We're all talking about Melbourne's population growth and how it was going to exceed Sydney's population pretty soon. It was on track to do that. But I suppose, unsurprisingly, with the long lockdown last year and everything that's transpired, people are leaving Melbourne.
There is no doubt. In fact, a new data set that was released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics early in February really showed the scale of what has happened to Melbourne during the coronavirus. Between March and September of last year, Melbourne lost 8,000 people in net terms to go to either country Victoria or interstate. Now, the reason why that loss of 8,000 people in that 6-month period is important is because if you look back over 20 years, Melbourne never loses people to country Victoria and the interstate. It's always everything balances out. The city grows because of high levels of overseas immigration and also natural increase. But what has happened is that there has been an outflow. And if you look at the figures for Brisbane and Sydney over the same timeframe, really there was no change to the internal flows of people to and from Brisbane, to and from Sydney. It was pretty much as it's always been. But Melbourne had this almost exodus over that 6-month period.
We can just put up a graphic on screen here that shows this in stark terms. Melbourne is brown there in the middle, and you can see that drop-off, whereas Brisbane is green at the top and Sydney blue at the bottom. And as you're saying, Bernard, of course, all three cities have lost the influx of immigrants because our borders have been cut off internationally. So it is a comparison there between the effect on three cities, and in Melbourne it's just plummeted.
Yes, in fact, that's the point. Anything that deviates from the long-term average creates issues. Now, I think we need to keep this in perspective as well. Losing 8,000 people over 6 months from a population base of 5 million doesn't really affect that city, the 5 million people. But it does have an impact on the small country towns and the sea change towns within striking distance of the capital, and that's certainly what's happening down the Ballarat and the Mornington Peninsula, the goldfields and so forth. Those people streaming out of Melbourne have moved in that direction and also interstate.
I think the two questions that fascinate me is, one, whether this is permanent, whether these people have left for good or they might be coming back to Melbourne when things settle down, and secondly, whether there's a trend then, whether you think that this might have permanently changed people's perceptions of Melbourne and life in Melbourne, and you might get more people looking to move to either country towns or to Queensland.
It's very interesting because if you look back to the previous recession, 91 through to maybe 92, 93 or so, Victoria actually lost population for about 4 or 5 years. So, a relatively minor recession compared to what we're going through at the moment had a 2 or 3 year impact on Victorians leaving their state, going interstate. I know a lot of them went to Hervey, but Hervey Bay benefited a lot. That came out in the census. So yes, Victorians do tend to stream north in tough times, but then later in the 1990s, things recovered, and then Melbourne and Victoria steamed ahead to the extent that in your introduction, your point was correct. For about the last 10 years, Melbourne has been closing the gap on Sydney, and it was on track to overtake Sydney in population by around about 2030. It'll be interesting to see, once these things settle down, whether Melbourne has lost that much, or whether in fact it'll just get back on track and go back. No one really knows until we get through this, I think.
We're one of the most centralised populations in the developed world, aren't we? A huge percentage of our population lives in the capital cities. Could this be the start of what might be a useful new trend of decentralisation?
Very much so, and in fact, I hope so. There's been a lot of government plans over the years to decentralise, from the 1970s, in fact, but it was never really successful. It needs to come from within. The people themselves need to want to go there. And I thought maybe with the sea change, tree change movement, of 20 years ago, that might have been part of it, but that was just retirees. The people that are leaving, if there's people streaming out of Melbourne at the moment, according to another data set, is 25 to 44-year-olds. These are young families. These are people taking their jobs and deciding they can achieve a better lifestyle in, say, Castlemaine, or in Ballarat, or Geelong, or in Byron Bay, for that matter.
Fascinating stuff. Thanks for joining us again, Bernard.
My pleasure.
Bernard Salt there, joining us from Melbourne to talk about Melbourne.